anyone hear the background noise from me? No?
No.
Okay. It's cooking in here, so I opened the window a bit.
Oh.
I think we're live.
Live.
So do I start? Hi, everyone. Indigenous Matriarch 4 Media Lab was brought together by creative director Loretta Todd alongside media matriarchs Cease Weiss, Tracy Kimbanu, Amethyst First Rider, and myself, Doreen Manuel. IM4 Media Lab is in partnership with Emily Carr University. IM4 offers workshops for Indigenous artists, storytellers, producers, media creators, and community members to learn about XR, gain technology training, and develop skills to create their own VR, AR, and 360 video productions. Our goal is to support Indigenous creators to help build an Indigenous presence in the VR space. We'd like to encourage you to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional territory that you enjoy where you are currently living, while we offer our IM4 land acknowledgement.
ACM, Hojka CM, Hojka TCM. Hello, my name is Reuben George. My traditional name is Skaloos. I'm from the Tsleil-Waututh Nation. That's where my mom is from. My dad is Squamish, and I have lots of relatives in Musqueam. On behalf of the three nations of my relations, we'd like to welcome you into our territory to conduct your business and to do your work. The good work that you do is similar to what my grandfather did, Chief Dan George. He worked hard to break the stereotypes of our people through media, film, radio, and theater, everything. And I'm glad to see you're working with like-minded people. Our Kosei Lishla is the foundation of what we at Tsleil-Waututh work towards and thrive for, to protect our lands and waters and people, and think of our future generations, but also educate people on who we are. So I thank you for doing the same work. I've seen the people who created, I know the people that helped to create your program, and I know they're like-minded people. And I'm happy that you have the same vision and are carrying the same vision as like my grandfather and like people before him. We have come a long way as Indigenous people, and there's a lot of misunderstanding of who we are. And right now, during these hard times, the work that you are doing is very important, because we're in our homes and we're secluding ourselves, but it's a good opportunity for people to watch film. It's a good opportunity to people to be educated on who we are. So the work that you're doing is full-heartedly supported by myself and my family and who we are. And I'm proud and happy and welcome you to our beautiful lands and our beautiful waters, and invite you to continue to do the good work that you do. So with much love and much respect, we welcome you. We welcome you for the good work that you're doing, and continue to do your good work. Hojka Siam, raise my hands to you and thank you.
You know that magical feeling when you're just sitting there in the crowd and you just feel the beat inside your soul, soothing every inch of it. I always love going to festivals and just feeling that energy, you know, just everybody all in their own space and mind. It's just like the Creator wanted us to all get together and enjoy this music and this feeling, but the government wants to take it away. It just wants everything to be in their control. But I think if we stand up as people, then one day we can take back our life, take back everything. That's what's special inside us, and us as people, is our freedom.
Thank you very much to Ruben George for offering us that incredible land acknowledgement, grandson to Chief Dan George. And I'd like to start by acknowledging our sponsors who have made this sharing opportunity possible. Thank you for the collaboration, Emily Carr School of Art and Design, and all the great people at Emily Carr, like Leanne Rooney and Dr. Stephen Lamb, and of course, the President, Dr. Gillian Fidel. And of course, our funders, Western Diversification, Congress of Aboriginal People, event sponsors, Creative BC, and special thanks to Ken, Clem, and Alan, and everyone at VIFF Immersive. We would also like to thank organizations like Discovery Foundation, Microsoft, and the CMF and the CDM, and special thank you to our founder, Loretta Todd, and Matriarch Cease Weiss, Amethyst First Rider, and Tracy Banu. I'm Doreen Manuel. Kesu Kyuket. I am Kantlupa Running Wolf, and I'm of Secwepemc and Ktunaxa Nation. I'm the sixth child of Dr. George Manuel and Marceline Manuel. I'm a graduate of the Aboriginal Film and Television program at Capilano University, and I have a master's in fine arts and film production from UBC. I've directed for television as the Canadian correspondent for Native Heartbeat and Northwest Indian News, and I've worked in various roles in the film and TV industry. You can check me out on IMDb or my website, runningwolf.ca, or on Facebook under Running Wolf. You can also check out my bead art found on my homepage of my website under Artist. I contributed 12 years of my life as the program coordinator dedicated to the development of the Indigenous digital filmmaking program at Capilano University. I was awarded the Woman in Film and Television Leadership and Education Award, and I'm their 2019 Woman of the Year. I own Running Wolf Productions, and I'm on the board of directors of Knowledge Network and Moving Images Distribution. I serve as a member of the Telefilm Indigenous Working Group and on the MPIA Equity and Inclusion Committee, and I'm an advisor with Telestory Hive Indigenous Envelope, and I'm also an IM4 Matriarch advisor and the director of the BOSA Center for Film and Animation. Our guests today are Casey Cozan of the Tsilhqot'in Interdisciplinary. He's an interdisciplinary artist from Yellowknife, Northwest Territories, that implements culture and technology in his creations that have the ability to trigger numerous bodily senses by combining a variation of installation sculpture, interactivity, new media, audio, and performance. Koyczan has a multimedia production diploma from Lethbridge College, a Bachelor of Fine Arts from Thompson Rivers University, and is now within his first year of MFA studies at the University of Manitoba, where he continues to build his knowledge and skills while traveling to fulfill his art and music careers. He is also a producer, actor, writer, teacher, workshop facilitator, and advocate for future generations of artists and musicians worldwide. Travis Mercredi is a Métis sound designer, musician, digital artist, and producer from Yellowknife, Northwest Territories. He has worked across mediums such as film, television, radio, theater, installation art, 360 video, games, and VR. Through the process of completing a degree in computation art at Concordia University, his practice has shifted focus to virtual reality and exploring its expressiveness and implications in the Indigenous context. Thank you both for being here today with us and sharing your wisdom and your experiences. I'd like to start off with a question to both of you. As Indigenous artists working with technology, how do you represent and interpret sound on the land in your immersive projects?
Who wants to go first?
Get away, Trav. It's all you, bud.
I guess when it comes to my sound practice, it has evolved through different mediums, and in some ways, immersiveness isn't necessarily specific to what we call like the sort of the new batch of immersive medias. So things like radio, you put on a set of headphones and listen to radio, or listen to a radio drama, or working in theater. There is that sense of immersion and that sense of context is there. So building a sound design practice is kind of finding a way that you see the relationship between the sort of the sound in a scene or in that world, the sort of the diegetic sound, to the sound that is an expression of your understanding of that world, or something that you're providing to enrich the subjective perspective or the emotional perspective of that world in the non-diegetic sound. So I think bringing those practices from that place, and it's been interesting to kind of like try to find that spot, that how that comes through me, I guess. And when it comes from sort of the land, it is that experience it's your experience of that environment. It is an internal experience when you're observing it. There's still, some places have different levels of volume when it comes to their environment, right? So I remember there's depending on how much biomass, I guess you could say, there's in the West Coast, there's very a lot more active, I guess. Whereas here it's up in the Northwest Territories in the Yellowknife, it's a different thing. There, the birds, the trees are very small, a lot of rock, and so it tends to be a very subtle experience. And I think to be in my interest in sort of ambience and drone and soundscape, it's that finding a way to sort of have that sort of thing have its own voice. And so when it comes to the land that I'm from, it really is about being very subtle. It's a soundscape, but it's something that is also a place where for me, I hear that and understand that place that I'm in, if that makes sense. So it's maybe not as loud or things like that, but I think that's a part of it for me.
Mm-hmm.
For me, I guess it would be like in taking inspiration from my culture and our instruments, like the Dene drum and that sort of thing, and chanting. I always felt this kind of, not necessarily an obligation or responsibility, but like just a desire to want to kind of like push that, to take it to the next level, to expand on these sounds in a certain way. I think honestly, like the kind of like thought process that I have kind of derives from my upbringing with like punk rock and like thrash metal and stuff like that, where it's just like, oh, this sound could be bigger, this could be huge. So kind of on the other sort of realm as where Travis is coming from, but in a similar way. Like throughout my music as like Naga or Koyczan, within my EP as Naga, there's Dene drum in every song in different kind of levels. Like sometimes that drum is like paired with a booming kick bass, and it has a ton of reverb on it, so it gives like the sound of like thunder or something. Whereas other songs, you don't really know it's a drum because it's the drum played through, but it's reversed. It has like some reverse delay on it, and it gives it this like rhythmic kind of aspect. And so I allow myself that kind of like experimental process to kind of like come naturally, and to really like push it as much as I can. And then that sort of understanding flows through into an immersive sort of realm, to bring these sounds into an immersive environment or film or video game, to kind of like elaborate on that kind of like digitization process, experimentation, while really representing my culture and indigeneity, and taking pride in it. Like I really enjoy that sort of process, and just trying to elaborate on these sounds and bring out other sort of notions of them to kind of like represent it a bit differently, while at the same time like having that core inherent sort of like understanding of my culture, which I'm still learning. So it's a fun process, and I try and have it kind of come from many different sort of ways. Like it's never really a linear sort of like path or process for me. Being inspired by many different things, I feel like I'm able to implement that in many different ways.
So do you ever like hear a sound in nature, whether it's a bird chirping or the sound of the water, and go home, because I know you're both musicians, and pick up an instrument and try to make some version of that sound?
Oh, absolutely.
It's like fun.
Yeah, we're like always inspired by nature and our surroundings, and it's a belief that like everything is kind of connected, right? In a different kind of way. And it's a really true sign of an artist, I believe, is that you can kind of like see things or hear things and interpret it in different ways. And it allows you to like grab that sound or that visual or whatever, work on it, form it into whatever, and then present it to the public. Like this, check out what I made or whatever, like this creation that I made, where maybe people wouldn't necessarily think of that, right? Like the flowing of a river could be interpreted in many different ways, and it's all in kind of how you experiment with that or understand it, and kind of channel that through your artistic process.
So you can actually really take somebody who's living in the city and doesn't have the opportunity to get out on the land, you can take them back to the land by the sounds that you're creating. That's healing. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
This has been initially one of the projects. Maybe this is not totally related to sound in some sense, but with one of the projects we worked on Northern Sights 360 with Western Arctic Moving Pictures, is that we took people. It was a project where they carved a polar bear on the ice north of Inuvik on the Arctic Ocean, and some elders watched it and started crying because they hadn't been able to go out. Like they hadn't been able to go out, and we hadn't thought about that maybe one of the use cases for virtual reality and immersive mediums is accessibility. Those people can't ride in the Skidoo anymore. Like it's too tough for them. But if they can go and see those places that they hadn't seen in years, because they're kind of they're in the home, or whatever. And I it's one of those things where you think it's for the young, but really there's something that there's some really rich media that provides for some of our accessibility challenged elders and stuff. So that sort of expanded it too. And I think we're still learning that as we show it, because I think maybe in some ways we're a little nervous to like how people are going to respond because it's something new. I think I think the more we test out, the more we see that it has a broad applicability and interest. As long as you're caring with people, it's very. I think one of the things was like is you're respectful and like a lot of people have to be kind of elders had to be sort of talked into it a little bit. Say like, look, we're not going to do anything. There's not playing a trick on you. Someone's going to be with you and all that. And then once they kind of get a chance to see it, they're very interested in it. And especially stuff that I mentioned in the conversations preceding, just the pace. We can control the pace of it in the sense that we can slow it down and make it something that just feels like you're there. And that's enough, It doesn't have to feel like you're racing through something. You could just stand there and be in that place. And that's sort of part of me what I was saying before about sound here. Like, oftentimes when I make ambiences for work that have been done or that is sort of situated in the north, I always find I'm always trying to find things without birds. It's like I'm just going through recordings and be like, oh, there's so many birds, or even like from library stuff where it's like this is not the Northwest Territories. Like if that'd be a crazy mass of birds. It's more about this texture of just the air and the trees and stuff as opposed to this very active sound. So it tends to be very subtle.
And what's incredible about that is something I've just been learning about recently is the 360 sound. So when you're standing in an environment, like say you're an elder standing on the land and you can hear a bird way over there that you haven't heard since you were young, and you turn and look and you can see the land behind, you can see the land all around you. and the sound can come at you from all different directions, just like the way it does naturally in nature. Is it really difficult to capture and to wrap sound like that?
No, actually, this is the interesting part about VR is that the technology that was used for sound. Maybe I'll plug my workshop tomorrow, right? Where I'll sort of give an overview of a layperson's overview, taking people from through the whole production pipeline of linear VR 360 work and then something more interactive. Maybe just touching on that because it's a big complex part. But actually, I have an object here. So this is a 360 microphone. So if you look at it, it has a set of 4 mics. And the way that the mics, what you sort of decode the 4 different signals that you get from this mic, then you can rebuild it into a spherical sound representation that you then, depending on what you're using or playing the sound back in, you use a type of listener. So in the case of VR and how you get that is that it creates this sort of spherical representation in digitally, and then you have a listener which will be your head. And so as your head moves, it's tracking what's to the outside of where your sort of virtual ears are, and it's representing that into your head using like binaural audio, which is sort of it's basically takes into account the shape of your head and how you hear sounds differently from one direction to the other. So sounds coming from here will be more clear in this ear than this ear, so that it maps that all into the process. And this stuff has been around for a while, but the technology wasn't necessarily on a consumer level for it. So there's kind of it's sort of speeding up very quickly, but it's speeding up very quickly. But it had been in universities, like Ambisonic had been there since like the 70s. I think they were doing stuff with it, and so now it's more it's a little bit easier. Just like when like film production with Final Cut, Final Cut Studio, how that was this huge leap of accessibility for people on a cost basis. And an experience and sort of infrastructure. The same thing is with those tools now coming up with like Facebook and Oculus providing those avenues and funding that because it's an incentive for them to have the content on their media, on their platform.
In your work, Casey, you have some examples for us. Can you guide us through some of your examples?
Yeah, absolutely. So if we just want to cue up the first one there, if we're able to do that.
Can we see it? Oh, it's playing. We can't see it.
Playing. Okay. Well, I assume it would be my creation of Migration 2491. So what this piece is inspired by is the Northwest Territories and how the caribou migrate from their place of origin to their breeding grounds and back and forth. And the idea is that in the year 2491, which is 1,000 years after the first point in contact, that the Northwest Territories has been so developed with infrastructure and diamond mines and that sort of thing that the caribou aren't able to migrate properly. So the only way that they can migrate in the year 2491 is through this giant portal, which basically brings them right to their breeding grounds safely, and then they're able to kind of transport back. So it's like this idea of like a futurism sort of aspect, which has a sort of like bad kind of view because it's like the North has been so overdeveloped that like it's affecting the animal population, but at the same time it's like we have to do whatever we can to save the caribou, right? So this
wormholes.
is like
caribou and wormholes.
It's very like sci-fi interpretation of how to save the caribou. So
what challenges did you have in creating the sound for this project?
Currently it doesn't have any sound. It's my sketch has been developed within Tiltbrush, but I'll be like doing a more professional grounded work of it in other programs like Masterpiece Creator and Masterpiece Motion, as well as implementing like Blender and most likely developing it in Unity. And then I'll be implementing sound in the later sort of stages, kind of give an idea as to where sounds are coming from and that sort of thing. So at the beginning, it's more of the development process, and then animation, and then sound will come later, and then implementation of everything within it. So if you want to go to the next slide, I believe it should be of a project I'm currently working on called Turtle Island. And this is, the image is from a sketch of this landscape. Basically, I'm making, it's still and might always be the biggest tilt brush creation that I've made. But basically, what the shot is showing is kind of like a detailed shot of a small area of this landscape of Turtle Island, and it's literally on the back of a giant sea turtle that's like flying through space, kind of like swimming through space and that sort of thing. And I'm developing this as a independent video game, made with Tilt Brush and Unity and Blender and a few other programs to kind of bring it all together. And then there's other work that I've been developing within a VR context. Working on a project right now that revolves around missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and having that representation within a virtual reality sort of area landscape. The figures are kind of, they're sort of vague in a way where it's representing Indigenous people of all kinds, with the representation of the red dresses, which was kind of created by artist Jamie Black, and kind of like paying respect to that sort of symbolistic aspect of it. So working with that kind of concept and still kind of like formulating exactly where it's going to go. But I want to say like it's a fun process, but it's also, this project in particular has been quite emotional. You know, like I've gone through many different stages within VR and how I work, and that sort of thing. But like I've never cried in VR until like making this project, because it just happened. You know, you're creating these figures and you're thinking about the people that have been lost and the injustices that a lot of people face all over North America and the world, and that sort of thing. And it hit me like quite a few times. But that's just another kind of that's another process and sort of like feeling that I've had within that project in particular.
I find that's the most powerful, I think, signal to myself when something's really working. Being a residential school survivor, I didn't cry very easily for a really long time, most of my life. And my sister, who was a poet, would confine me in a room and read her poetry to me. And if I cried, she'd know she finally made it with that poem, because even I couldn't not cry, you know, hearing it. And if I didn't cry, she would take it back to the, you know, computer and continue working on it.
Right.
But even today, I find when I'm editing sometimes, I break into tears sometimes too, because I'm really feeling it. And some of my students' works, there's one film in particular, it doesn't matter how many times I watch it in a row even, every single time it gets to a certain point, the tears just come out. And I just think that a lot of people aren't really in touch enough with their soul and with themselves to allow themselves to get to that place of vulnerability where they just really dig in. So it's amazing to hear that you go to that level to find the right feeling and sound to mix in. What's the most, working in sound, what is the most challenging thing that you find? Is it technology, or is it your own self as an artist trying to dig inside to find that place where you can, you know, some people might call it the zone, where you can get into that rhythm of creating what you need to create to help people feel it.
Yeah, I think with sound for me, it definitely is the more creative work, because there's still, that's when you're always kind of on the edge of what you can do. You know, you're encountering your artistic capacity and trying to muster the best that you can, you know, to try to convey something. I find that probably the most difficult. Technology for me is, I wouldn't say it's come easy, but I feel like it's in a different, it's in a place where, you know, having been growing up with it, you get acclimatized to maybe how it works a bit more. And I think that we're on this. I remember there's a period in game design where it was essentially programmers that were the artists, and that they had a lot of drab games, and they learned, and the companies learned that they needed to have artists make tools for artists, and artists had the power of programmers. And I feel like that's a lot of the software has taken that approach of intuition, so that one thing is this sort of definitely building your craft, but knowing at which points you start to lose that immediacy of being able to be an artist. That's the point where, you know, get a collaborator, or, you know, so parts of my practice sometimes I am like, you know, some of the works that me and Casey have done, definitely wearing a programmer hat and working in the development side on the game engine. But then when it comes to sound design, it's like a lot of that work has been done before, like, you know, I've exercised that to the point where it is about trying to find the thing that represents how you want to express it in sound.
Yeah, like for me, it was, it seemed like throughout my career, let's call it, for lack of a better word, it's been like aesthetic and technology have run side by side. They've kind of drifted apart from each other, but then kind of like ultimately came back together, where my understanding and capacity for art and to be able to express myself had kind of like gotten better, and getting more like contextualized ideas and that sort of thing, while at the same time finding the right technology that works for me. And I found that for me personally, one of the biggest advancements within my career was when I started working in sound with Ableton Live. I switched from Pro Tools to Ableton, and it was like the Pandora's box just opened up, you know, because I used to, when I was working Pro Tools before, I'd get this like anxiety, you know, like I called it like recording anxiety, because like Pro Tools is legit. It's like the industry standard basically, right? But there's just so much within this program that like I'd get this anxiety and I just wouldn't even record, because I'd just be like, oh man, I don't know how to do this. So when I started using Ableton, everything just clicked. Like I just started being able to understand things. It's a very intuitive program, and I don't I don't say that I'm able to understand Ableton better. I like to say that Ableton understands me, and that's kind of a weird sort of concept. But it's so intuitive that like you think that this is how it might work, and it does work that way. As well as just being able to create content so much quicker, because it has this like easier sort of palette to work with. Like in regards of like octaving something up, you know, it's so much easier in Ableton because it's just a dial that you kind of turn. And I just found like the quality of my sound, soundscapes and music and that sort of thing, it increased like 10 times when I started using Ableton, as well as being able to use Ableton with my artwork as well, because it has this huge like meaty connection factor to it, where you can connect numerous things to it in order to like trigger sounds and that sort of thing, motion sensors and detectors and 360 laser range scanners and like Xbox Connect cameras. Like they can all connect to this audio software in order to make your experience that much more immersive, mostly within the regards to art. Because I've had like my laptop hooked up to my installations, but the laptop is like hidden behind this like black screen sort of thing. But that was just one instance for me in how my aesthetic and technology is kind of run parallel to each other.
I think for also people that are listening to maybe that we don't have that much experience with different audio software, that is to kind of try them out and see what they get from them. Like for me, there's things that Pro Tools, like I am just so like, it's like an old parka, man. I throw that on, I'm ready to go. Like, and there's things that I know that I can't do in any other software, but that's very specific to film-based sound, especially when it comes to chopping and editing sound, as opposed to music composition or sound design, a certain type of sound design anyway, let's say. But there's also, I think right now the tools are becoming very much more affordable. Like a decent Pro Tools rig when I started, like I guess 10 years ago, sounds like a really long time, but that would have set people back a few $1,000s, just for the bare bones software. And it might not even actually do what they needed to do. Now there's software like Reaper, which is, has a, though you don't have to authorize it, you can use it for free until, and it costs $70, and that can fully functionally do right now is actually probably the seems to be the software that's being used for designing 360 and VR audio. I worked at a sound studio and music composition studio mainly, but the sound as well in Montreal called La Hacienda, and they were doing most of their stuff within Reaper, which is like $100 software, and they're doing stuff like Tomb Raider and like big games. So the tools have become much more accessible. I think it's really just putting in that time into it to make it feel like it's reactive, that it's responding to you, and that's sort of learning the different idioms of the interface. And I really hope, like, it's coming from the Northwest Territories. I hope that this isn't just a selective. There isn't a select group of people that can use these tools and create these kinds of things. Is that technology is providing us with tools that can be affordably used. And I hope that people in communities, in northern communities, that they see that this is a window into this massive creative palette that's available to them. And, we're still sort of pushing for that. I think it's still up here, maybe off the radar a bit. It does take very specialized people to show that it's being in use. But like, if someone sees someone do electronic music, they're most likely using Ableton Live, or they might be using Fruity Loops in the case of like Tribe Called Red. I know they use that stuff, that software. So I see it as potentially being like the new guitar. Or the fiddle, right? Those things were accessible. Those things were widely used in these creative places because they were portable and they were rugged in the environment. I think a laptop and this kind of software is going to be kind of like a new sort of folk instrument that hopefully that people use it in that way. That it's not just simply these sort of some kind of elite sort of group of digital artists that use it.
It's really cool to see that, like
tools, though, like a microphone, for example, or that mic you just showed us.
Well, I think the big hedge into that is definitely on phones. There's some very powerful sound design tools on phones. There's one called Cubasis. Even GarageBand is on there. People can start that and get acclimatized to at least the fundamentals of it. And I think that's actually, I think in the Northwest Territories, we sort of fought to get people over the years. Even when I was growing up, sort of digital literacy was on the back of a desktop computer. I didn't really have one, I think, until I was like in my 20s. Like in our house, we had like a really old one. Like that is a form of computing that people can access, and the phone is at this right price point. But I think we tend to we think of the phone as this place where we can't be ourselves. We're accessing another place, but that we can't actually, put ourselves in it. That we have this contentious relationship that the phone is somehow de-indigenizing us. And so we sort of hide it. It's sort of like say, well, that's not us, but I'm using it every day. Or you go into a community and everyone in this remote community has that phone in their pocket and they're doing all kinds of stuff with it. But we don't feel that welcome to use it in a creative way because there's this contentious relationship with that technology. And I think it is even when I went to Montreal, I'm older guy in my 30s, like with students that were like 20 and other students that were like 20, and they had this whole thing about how the phone was sort of like changing their relationship with things. And I was like, well, I come from a place that's pretty quiet. Like it's not, it's, I think you guys are like, you realize there's a lot of noise here for sure, but it's not so much the phone, it's how you behave in that environment. And so We're seeking that in some ways. I would, when I know a lot of when I was growing up, we were hungry for something. We were what we saw on TV, we read magazines. I think we need to find conduits for that youthful energy that wants to sort of absorb these things and see change. It's coming sort of from filmmaking. We got into it because there was something exciting that we could be creatively involved in that wasn't necessarily a part of where we were from, but we knew that we could offer something to it and thereby offer something to the rest of our people by engaging with it. And I think that the phone is this platform that we begrudgingly, I think we do have to build etiquette and protocols around how we engage with it to be expressive, because it's there, it's available, it's like low hanging fruit, Whereas like the laptop is that stage too, I mean, if it was up to me, I would give everybody a laptop, to say, hey, take the money, then just fund it, and just everyone gets a laptop. You're in high school, get a laptop. Then you can figure, like, we could do that maybe, but I think the phone is that direct route, that first step. And then you can, like, there's some great soundscaping tools. There's one called Soundscaper, which is a very complex sound design tool that's on the phone. You can record with it, process it, save it, send it to yourself over Google Drive, all on the phone. So there's really stuff there, and it's growing quite quickly.
Do you have anything to add, Casey? You had to say something earlier.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to, like, the comments revolving around the phone, like, first of all, like, when you started talking about, like, the indigenization or, like, de-indigenizing yourself with the phone, reminded me of that meme where it's like when your phone starts recognizing your language and the hand is like the robot hand from Terminator. It makes sense though, because like I try, like, sometimes when I try and write something, for example, like the word mark or whatever, it'll automatically autocorrect to Masi. And so I'll, like, randomly say Masi to someone, like thanking them for whatever, like kind of random. But yeah, like the phone has so many parts to it that you can utilize, like especially in regards to sound and that sort of thing. Like within my music and my compositions, there's a lot of samples within these songs and compositions that are recordings from my phone, like extracted audio from like video clips that I'm taking, or the voice memo function, because that has a really good kind of like atmospheric sort of like capability to it. Within my song Ravenous, I was on break at work one day when I was up in the Northwest Territories, and there was this raven just kind of like going crazy and making all of these different sounds. So I just took up my phone and started recording it, and then extracted that sound, brought that into Ableton, started chopping it up, and made this like beat out of it with this raven, right? And then the song formed into like my political views as a raven sort of thing. So it was this weird kind of idea, but like it's that kind of realization that you could do so much with this thing that like you don't just have to call or text or use it for social media. Like you could use it for a wide variation of things. And in regards to accessibility, like there's numerous free apps out there, and there's tons of digital audio workstations. Like a lot of people are using Logic, Ableton, Pro Tools, Reaper, like, and those are just a few, right? But a lot of people don't know about a program called Audacity, which is very bare bones. Like it's minimal, but it's absolutely free. And I'll be honest, I use Audacity a little bit for kind of like sketching out ideas, like within an audio realm sometimes. But it's, if someone doesn't have that like $100 to $500 to buy a digital audio workstation, you could just go to audacity.com and download this digital audio workstation, and it's great for beginners, that like intro step for people. And then you pick up like a cheap MIDI keyboard that's like $20 to $35, and boom, right there you can start creating your own soundscapes and music and do your own narrations. There's like numerous cheap mics out there, or you can just use the mic on your laptop or the mic on your phone, and whatever you have to do in order to create, an artist will utilize whatever resources they have around them to bring their ideas to fruition.
you finding that there are very many Indigenous people interested in sound design? You know, in the 15 years that I've run the Indigenous digital filmmaking program at CapU, I've only had 5 students who showed an interest in recording with like location sound or sound design and who kind of went down that road. And in BC here, it's hard to find Indigenous people to send out on location to do location sound for movies or to do sound design. We have like a handful, but I'm assuming you two have traveled, you know, a lot in North America and probably are really connected to other sound people. Do you find a lot of Indigenous people interested or working in this field?
Personally, not really. There's a few. I mean, I think it could have been like, you know, it could be just the exposure and understanding of that. I mean, it's not something that is like when I remember saying I was going into sound design over the dinner table at my uncle's house, and that, you know, I was crickets on that one. You know, it was like, well, who the hell's going to give you a job then? You know, like what is it? You know, like you just like confusion's like, all right, just silence. Okay, you know, he's just not even. He doesn't know how to continue with that. You know, he's a pretty old-fashioned guy. I mean, mind you, that guy is pretty good on a cell phone though. He's always chatting, you know, sharing gossip on his phone. But like, but yeah, I think that it is sometimes maybe that it is because it's sort of a secondary role or a collab role. It's a little bit more off the beaten path. You know, young people that I've met that were into sound usually come to it by way of music.
Yeah.
We have like, you know, the sort of the Indigenous Renaissance it has a strong musical contingent. And so the sound design stuff is sort of more like something that would come later. It's not something that is very, very obvious. I mean, when I got into it, I had no idea what I was kind of getting into per se, other than I was going into an audio engineering program. And it was a bit different than the other ones. And that ended up, once I got acquainted with it, I was like, oh, this actually gave me a lot of power, really. I mean, had I gone into a music production program, I don't think I would have had the same confidence to approach those kinds of that kind of stuff. You know, like we had location sound experience in classes and stuff, and so I was able to, you know, go through that and at least have some of that knowledge. I mean, every aspect of it sort of, you know, you learn. There's a lot of like bumps along the way of projects that kind of went sideways on you, but it is something that. Yeah, it needs to have more people that sort of champion it or you know support it, and I think that it's just a matter of visibility. I mean, even like filmmakers, you know, that is even still. I mean, but I'm talking about our context, I guess, is mainly from the Northwest Territories, so we're remote and in some ways disconnected, and so it's harder to have those examples. Like when I went to Imaginative, like that for me was like the first time. That was like it was amazing for me. I mean, I wish I could just take like a dozen people from here up every year to kind of understand, so that they can see others, you know, in their community or in their region. They might be the one person that even has the, like out of that, you know, maybe per capita kind of thing that has that inclination, but there's no one there to mentor them, to give them confidence in that interest. And so it becomes this thing that, you know, I call it almost like it's almost more of a problem, you know, just to be artistically inclined sometimes, especially when it comes to technology, you know, that it isn't necessarily seen as a honorable pursuit. I think in at least in the north of like an Indigenous person in their craft, definitely wasn't on the table when I was in my late teens, for sure. So and to say that you could do Indigenous work, you know, in that field, it wasn't there. So, I mean, I think that's like where maybe here, you know, I can kind of like help that along and develop that. I definitely feel like I'm a stepping stone for another generation of people to hopefully be more involved in that.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. I think the number is definitely growing. Like, and there is that increased visibility that's kind of happening. Mind you, like sound design seems to be kind of like a more of a post-production sort of thing. So it's like usually sound designers aren't like the actor that's at the forefront of a film or like on the poster. Like, I mean, that'd be awesome, Trav, if it was like a movie poster just featured you, right? Like the sound designer, right? But that's not the case. Yeah, it's like having the boom, you know? People don't realize like how important that is because it's not this visible thing, right? It's not something that you can see. It's something that you can hear and primarily just hear.
Luckily, it's like sometimes it's like if no one talks to you and you don't say anything, that's like a good job. But it's like it's the unnoticeable, right? It has to be. If any problem comes up, that's like when things go sideways. But it's like silence, nothing. If nothing's going wrong, that's a good day.
Yeah. But there's so much importance of it, and it can kind of be this like subconscious kind of thing, right? Like I always kind of allude to like horror and thriller movies where you don't necessarily realize how important sound is to like sound design is to a composition or to a film or something like that, but it's always there, and I find that sound designers and musicians really can kind of pick up on that a little bit more. Like there's sometimes within a horror film or like a sci-fi film or thriller or something like that where nothing scary is happening on the screen. Yeah. But the sound that's kind of playing that like amplified kind of like daunting sort of sound is building up and it's giving you this kind of like anxiety, and then next thing you know something on screen happens and it scares you like crazy, right? So they're like it's this kind of process or this kind of like generative sort of like increase of this feeling that happens that's triggered by sound. So I feel like a lot of it is kind of sort of in the background, but within your subconscious it's kind of like right in front of you.
I think there's a part of it though that I think a lot of non-Indigenous people don't realize that an Indigenous sound designer would bring to the table. I was advising on a film one time and I advised on the script part because the Indigenous people in the script were flat. And I said, well, what nation are they from? Because what nation they're from is going to tell you what kind of artwork is hanging in this Indigenous person's home and what the relation between the grandma and the kid is. So when I advised on that, they wrote that this little boy was a grass dancer. So they wrote in the script, the little boy samples some grass dance moves for his grandma with the grass dance song singing in the background off of a CD. And so when I was in the production meeting, I said to the sound designer, how are you going to get the grass dance song from which? Because he said, well, I'll just grab one off the internet. And I said, powwow people don't call it a grass dance song. It's the beat that tells you it's a grass dance song. How are you going to identify which one is the grass dance song? Are you familiar with powwow? And he said, no. And I said, and on top of that, all of those songs are copywritten. They belong to a particular drum group, and it's almost summer, and all those drum groups are going to be on the road to powwows. How are you going to contact them? How are you going to know who in the drum group to contact? Because there's a lead singer for every drum group. And then sometimes there's actually a manager, and sometimes that drum group actually has a recording contract with a company. And so their songs are all licensed to that company. And he didn't know any of it. And so finally I said, well, do you want me to do it for you? And he said, yes, please. So right away I contacted the drum groups I knew and I got them a song and everything. And, when I contacted their recording company, the recording company said, well, we're not going to choose the song for you. You're going to have to go through the whole catalog and choose a song. So then I had to go through the catalog and listen to them all for the beat. So it was a lot of work that I put in for free, basically, to locate a grass dance song for them. And do you run into those kind of things with non-Indigenous people who don't understand the extent of your expertise and how much they need you, that they don't, they don't even know how much they need you?
I think a part of that is your own representation and like what you kind of bring to the table and making sure that they kind of know that, right? Like, very rarely.
Assuming that you're also in touch with all these musicians, because we have so much music out there, like, from Sandy Schofield to, Kelly Derrickson to, just like amazing musicians all across Canada, including yourselves, who have a huge library of music. And as people involved in the music, you've listened to it, you're familiar with Murray Porter's style and the kind of music he has, so that when you sit down to sound design something and it's Indigenous, you can pull out of this incredible library of knowledge to figure out which artist, maybe, maybe this is a Jason Burnstick spot where one of his instrumental guitar sounds would go perfect here. But a non-Indigenous person wouldn't be that as familiar as you with the vast number of styles and product out there.
I've worked with some people in the past where they're kind of like oblivious to a lot of that understanding, but I've been very fortunate to work with a lot of groups that do kind of respect what I'm able to bring to the table and like the amount of knowledge that I'm able to kind of like allocate to certain different things. It wasn't always like that, like as any artist or sound designer or musician can relate, is like in the intro kind of like stages of your career, you tend to do like some free gigs and stuff like that. But now it's like, I paid my dues, man. Like, I'll do some like charity gigs and that sort of thing, but it's just like, show me that bread, and then I'll put like 100% in. Where, but it's all kind of subjective, right? Like, I've been really fortunate to have a lot of like really grounded people approach me to do work, and they are contacting me because they know what I can do and how I can kind of like bring my kind of style to the table. I've been asked to shoot some like music videos and direct some music videos for people, and I tell them, it's like, it's going to be kind of like weird, right? And they're like, yeah, well, that's why we're asking you. It's like, okay, good. Like, I just want to make sure that that I kind of make some trippy stuff. So, but I'm proud of that, right? And it's like what you can kind of like, what you can bring to the project to make like it overall just a lot better.
The Q&A portion of our webinar is just ready to start here. So I'd like to read the first question that comes from our audience, and that is, how have you gone about building an Indigenous sound library?
Well, for me, it's just recording stuff around here. I mean, this is for my environment. I don't like it's hard to say coming from like what's a particularly Indigenous sound as opposed to designing something. I work a lot in documentary, and it's more natural environment than it is like, so it's more diegetic than non-diegetic sound, and so it's also being able to sort of see what's there, what's available in library to create something that's unique to your perspective and that you think is appropriate to the environment and appropriate to the place. Building a sound library is kind of a lifelong project. You're always sort of doing it, and you're always like but you find things that are unique that you'll record. Like I have a lot of like hide scraping sound libraries. So some of that can be, you can also take those things and then use them as subtext. So like you can take that thing and go like into the micro level and then use that in another sound that it may not be audible, but you're essentially putting in these subliminal cues in some ways. So you design something and add it into it, and so maybe in some ways that's sort of in your back pocket, but you're hoping that subconscious or unconscious aspect of that sound is there, and that's also kind of like leaving a mark inside of the machine in a little bit, and that was your perspective, and that you added that to it. So yeah, with sound library, it's really collecting what's around you, and putting your stamp on what you can find in things that are accessible. Even when you're doing post-production, you're going to be working a lot from library, some from yours and some from others. You need, it's hard to get everything that you need. So I think you're kind of as the curator, you're also the curator, of that same thing. You're the person that you're the translator of those sound as well.
Mm-hmm.
I found it's an interesting comment. Like your sound library is an ongoing sort of like lifelong project. I was thinking about my like sound bank and sound library and sample database today, and there's so much of it that has come from all over the place. Like a lot of it, some of it I've created myself, some I've acquired from friends who they're like, hey, I have this sound pack. Like he gave me like the Sony Pictures sound library, and it was like, that's primo. It's like, sounds like straight from Sony movies and that sort of thing, right? And it's also like what you can create. Like I have a vast like bank of just Dene drum sounds, like with different Dene drums recorded at different beats per minute, like different tempos and different patterns within those different beats per minute, so that they could be utilized for a lot of different things. And I remember providing that to I was visiting Eugene Boulanger in Vancouver once, and I'm like, look, man, I want to give you this library, you know, but so this is kind of like sacred, but I want to give it to you because, like, you know, I like what you're doing and how he utilizes them, that sort of stuff. So we started to use that within his music as Young Dene and a lot of his creations now and that sort of thing.
That hide scraping got into got into a fashion show by Tanya Larson where he did the beats for it using that hide scraping that I got from that Dene Naho hide tanning camp in Yellowknife.
Nice.
So it's like, you know, it's like we're just getting that stuff all around.
Yeah, and that's another thing. Like when I was within the urban hide tanning camp that Dene Naho was running, I brought my like Zoom H4n recorder to the hide camp one day, and I asked if I could record like Mandy McDonald like scraping the hide, and then utilize that hide scraping sound within a composition I made called like Setse Time, where it's more of like an atmospheric sort of soundtrack, but it has this very like indigenous kind of sound to it. And maybe people wouldn't, like, who have never been around like hide tanning or anything, wouldn't really know what that sound was. They just think it's a scraping sound of some sort, right? And then there's like this transformative aspect of utilizing other sound samples and that sort of thing. Like one company that I absolutely love their samples in creating like the electronic music that I make is a company called Black Octopus, and they have this sound pack series called Leviathan, and they're huge sounds. Like the kick basses are just like thumping, you know, their crashes are awesome, snares are wicked, and it's interesting to bring that into a DAW, into Ableton or something, and like indigenize that in a way. Like one of my favorite things to do is syncing up a kick bass from this pack and a Dene drum, like putting them together and making this whole new sound, kind of like forming it in a different way, modeling it like clay and presenting it in a different way that it normally wouldn't be heard as just like a regular sort of sound. So it's all in the artist as well. Like every indigenous artist has their own style. They're going to make things sound a certain way and what sounds good to them, right? And that's all that matters. Like if like, you know, you can cater to other people, especially if you're working in a team project. It's like there has to be this collaborative aspect towards like with the director or something like that. But as wearing my musician hat, like make what sounds good to you, you know, and utilize whatever samples and anything from your sound library that sounds good to you, because that's all that matters. Like you're the one that's making it. You shouldn't have to like make music to cater to someone else's liking. You know what I mean? That's why like I take my hat off to like all the experimental musicians and sound artists out there, because it's just like that's weird stuff, man. Like but like it really sounds good to some people. Like, you know, Ben Frost's compositions may not sound good to a lot of people, but like me and Travis love this kind of stuff, you know. It's like, what's this increasing like crackling sound that turns into like static from a TV, and we're just sitting there like, yes.
Like elemental in its own way, right? It's subverting it's bringing in these organicness into electronics, electronic music and electronic sound composition. I mean, I think that's one of those things where there's just so much territory to play, because a lot of it's like honed in by rules of the machines. You know, machines have really defined how, say, electronic music is sounded. As someone who's like kind of interested in that aspect of it, I find what we see with this kind of sound design and audio software is that now it's sort of wide open of what can be done. And I think that's one thing I wanted to maybe imply is that, you know, you're ultimately, whatever you are as a sound designer, that is imbuing some kind of indigeneity, whatever you're, you know. I think that to have let those things be permeable to sort of maybe your contemporary perspective and your indigenous perspective, let them influence each other and become something. You know, I think that's that they're, as I said with the phone, right? Let those two, who you are, you know, where you come from, your culture, let that interact with the technology, and that will inform the technology, and it will respond in ways and empower what your perspective is. And I think that sometimes maybe say that is there, to put a line, there shouldn't be any lines through that when you're engaging with it.
We'll move on to the next question. When the inspiration of your projects first find you, what is your next step after that? Is it a technical, emotional, or more a logistical process for you?
That's a great question. I find that, like, I don't really have one formula or anything like that for creation. Like, the idea and the inspiration itself can come from many different sort of realms and ways of understanding and that sort of thing. Within my artwork and installations primarily, like, I can kind of relate to that in terms of like where the initial inspiration came from. The installation that I did for my BFA, which is called Mode of Ascension, it's like this giant 8-foot log that's hollowed out 3/4 of the way through, and it's like taking over this room by like having a bunch of branches kind of coming out of it, sort of like an upside down nest. The initial inspiration for that installation came from the movie Alien, where Ripley and the child are navigating their way through the spaceship, and then they stumble upon the xenomorph queen. And I watched this movie as a kid, right? But then I watched it later on as an adult within university, and there's that scene where it just like pans up, and the xenomorph queen is just like standing there looking at them. And I just thought, like, I need to make that. Like, I want to make people feel that, like what Ripley is feeling right now. That kind of like invasiveness, that doominess, that like the aspect of like nature taking over, right? So within that inspiration, it's like, okay, well, how do I make that? This log is going to represent the queen, and all the foliage and branches are going to represent like all the limbs and the tubes that are like hooked up to the breeding system that the queen is hooked up at. And then the emotive kind of feeling is going to come from the soundtrack, which is like this really heavily experimental soundtrack utilizing a lot of found sounds. This multi-effect pedal that I had at the time that had like every effect imaginable, and just letting my mind kind of like roam in how to kind of like bring that to fruition. But there's also other ways where sometimes within my compositions as like Casey Koyczan, which is more of like a textured, atmospheric sort of genre. I don't really like that word because I don't like to apply to that. I consider myself an interdisciplinary musician, which is like a no-no in the music industry because like they try and fit you into these boxes. Or I'm like, no, forget that. Where I really enjoy creating compositions based on emotion. Like I have this track called Longing, where it's basically just trying to communicate that feeling of longing and of extreme empathy and maybe a little bit of sadness and that sort of thing. So there's many different ways that these kind of ideas come to fruition, and sometimes it's straight up technology. Like if you get a brand new guitar or sampler or something like that alone can inspire so many different ways of creation and how to use things. And going back to Ableton, like I found that when I started utilizing Ableton, it was just like I could do anything with this. Like there's so many different things that are possible, and it's just allowing yourself that kind of like creative freedom to not be restricted to just one linear path, and thinking of it more along the lines of like a big spider web where you can kind of move in all sorts of directions and take inspiration from everywhere.
For me, working collaboratively in a project, it's always finding. I guess it's almost more logistical. Like that the inspiration is the discovery of some kind of resonant factor of it. This like you start to really internalize the narrative, and you feel the beats of either a film project or like theater or whatever. You see those points in which you need to have, that you can contribute to what that idea was, or that either the writer or the director is putting forward, and finding a way to enhance that. That's what I find is key. So once you have that, it's like put your planning around it, because it's going to take a while to go through these stages, and so you have to manage that thing is, it's inspiring enough and that you feel it's the right choice, and you work it through the collaborative process, and then you start to build the necessary pieces around it to make it, to execute it. So you have like an hour-long piece, you know, it's like, what are the themes that we want to bring into this? You know, like I'm a fan of like the sort of like messaging things from the beginning and the end, and kind of trying to make it like it's existing at one time. So you have certain sounds that reappear, or, you know, certain atmospheres or pieces of music. I like tying pieces of music to characters, the sort of leitmotif idea. And that, so that you're building this background web that is a part of the experience that makes it feel more structured together and glued together. It's not simply responding to what's on the screen. It's responding to the story. Maybe that it's a memory. These, like, it's something that feels like it's a cohesive whole, that it could exist as one time. So, you know, I think, yeah, I think it's logistical, because you always have to plan that out, you know, and run these sort of like, build the conspiracy board of how you're going to integrate all these sounds into that project. And so that when you pull it back, it's not just, this is what I could do when I had that rush of inspiration, but that inspiration gave me maybe see this larger picture that opened up, that was then I could tap into for all these different little creative ideas as I was going along. How did that thing going to sound? How is that going to sound? What kind of music? Should there be no music there? What kind of music should we put there? You know, I think as a sound designer, it's trying to see that these things on multiple layers, and have those discoveries, and make sure that they're all, you know, bound together in the one whole project.
There's quite a few more questions that have come through that we're not going to get to, because we've only got 3 more minutes here. So I'll just ask this next question. Creating your projects within the immersive landscape can only reach a certain population of Indigenous people and leaves others out. How do you bridge the gap between the groups with your work? Or are there gaps?
There's definitely gaps, and I think this is something that we need to bridge this one. And I think that'll happen with something like the phone, right? Facebook, Oculus is a Facebook product. There's a lot of different aspects within the 360 film aspect. That's the primary tools are built by Facebook. 360 photos and 360 video can be viewed on Facebook as it's posted, using the camera as the tracker as well. The binaural audio processes are all baked in as well, so you can get that same thing. It's how we can still use those tools at different levels. And the hope is that we also send exhibition works around. Casey has an art gallery that's basically, you know, urban shaman art gallery in VR. Well, we have with the Northern Sights 360 project, we have headsets, Oculus Quest going around to different communities so they can try those things out. So in some sense, we take the art gallery, and it's logistically less of a problem, where you just got like a couple briefcases, you know, show up with a couple Pelican cases, like boom, all right, open the doors, let's go. And then it's like, then put these things in a space that they couldn't exist logistically in smaller communities. So those tools are very much there, and they're adapting and they're evolving. I just think as we grow that skill set, look for those avenues in which, yeah, I want this to go to a small community. I mean, that's where like that my belief is in that. And it's like, there are potentials there, as long as we don't see it as being this thing where, oh, I need to own a $2,500 computer and a $1,000 headset to view it. It's like there are scalable. It is scalable between these different experiences, from phone to portable VR to desktop VR.
Yeah, and it's like that challenge, especially within like VR and immersive technology, like cost is a thing, right? Like, and as new technology kind of comes out, the older technology is more cost efficient. I found that to kind of like bridge that gap of accessibility, I found it was important within the prototype that me and Travis created when I was at KC Visions is to upload it to YouTube with a 360 component to it. So you're able to look around within the creation with your phone, but it also has the option that you can break it into 2 different viewable planes so that you could utilize Google Cardboard, which is a very cheap, cost-efficient sort of way to implement yourself into an immersive sort of world.
With the cardboard, though, you don't get the sound, do you?
Yep, you get sound.
Oh, you do? Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
It'll just come from your phone.
You just headphone it.
We've got 5 minutes and about 4 more questions. What are some staple influential soundscapes you recommend for getting a grasp on the intricacies of your profession? Is there a quick answer for that?
When it comes to film sound, like Apocalypse Now, I mean, and anything by Skywalker Sound. I mean, if you're into film sound, or at least sound design and creative sound design, Skywalker Sound has always been kind of one of these great places for that kind of stuff. And then I mean, in games, there's just so many great audio based games. I'm actually drawing a blank, but there's just like any one of them is going to be incredible at a high level. So like if it's like Assassin's Creed or if it's, Call of Duty, that's also, there's a lot of creative work that goes into that.
Do you find it? Go ahead.
In regards to music, I'll just plug this company called Ghost Hack. I believe they're German, but they provide tons of free sample packs that you could just download. They do a Christmas advent calendar every year. So like throughout 25 to 30 days of December, they'll have a free sound pack for every day. So that's been a resource that I've hit up.
Cool. Do you find yourself reusing certain sounds and using it like a motif?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Example?
I don't know. There's just certain things that you'll use for ambiances. There's certain sound effects that always come in handy. I mean, the more you do sound design, and especially when you do work in film sound, you hear sounds that come up all the time. And some of it's just because it's like bread and butter stuff. But certainly you want things to be tied to the moment that you're in. But I mean, like, I'd say that something like a high violin sound has been used in so many different ways. There's things that people cue into. So comes to reusable stuff, I'm not sure exactly how to kind of say, but there's definitely this sort of repurposing that's just a part of having a library, and really it's about what you think is like appropriate or fits that moment. But it comes from just playing with it and doing it and finding the things that you like.
I find I reuse my Dene drum samples like over and over, and sometimes I'll use the same sample at a same tempo, but I'll use it in a different sort of form.
What program would you recommend for starting out with learning sound art? I know you mentioned a number of them already. You mentioned Audacity, Ableton. Are those?
For very introductory purposes, very, very introductory, especially like youth, I'd recommend Audacity. I'm pro Ableton now, man. Like I'm not even touching anything else. So
yeah, but Ableton's like $700, right? That's the problem with Ableton.
Yeah.
I would say the number one thing people should go to just for any sound work that you want to do, Reaper. Go to Reaper.fm, download the software. You can use it for free as indefinitely. They have a open trial period for as long as you want, and then you can buy it for $70. And when you're there, go to their video section. They've killed it in their video tutorials. They're on their website. Their video tutorials will take you from nothing to like recording bands to like working with to doing just sound design. Like it's a complete package. And I mean, I would say start with that. Audacity is very idiosyncratic to a certain. To programmers, I think, that built it. Reaper could take you. You could be using Reaper in a video studio in Montreal, a video game studio in Montreal, and that's totally fine. EA, they're asking for people with Reaper experience. So you can start for free, and that's been the system now. It's like Unity you can get for free, Unreal you can get for free. They want you to have that language ingrained to use it, and they're building the tools behind it. So Reaper, go to Reaper. That from there, that's where you start from.
Perfect. That's it for us.
Okay.
Squeeze in. Thanks so much for joining us, and thank you to our guests. And I'll turn it back to our technicians to take over. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Merci.